My name is Vanessa Walker, and this is the story of my life, filled with love, betrayal, and the struggle for justice. I am 29 years old, and now I am studying at the Faculty of Law, but not so long ago my life was far from what it seems today. A few years ago, I worked as a dishwasher in a small, slightly shabby restaurant in Seattle, Washington. It was an ordinary, unremarkable restaurant, with peeling walls and a characteristic smell of fried food that soaked into every crack on the floor and into every detail of the interior. It would seem that such a great thing could happen in a place where I, dressed in a simple uniform, washed mountains of dishes daily to the sounds of crashing plates and hissing grill. And yet that's where my story began, a love story that was amazing and painful. It was one of those cloudy, typical Seattle days when the sky seems to merge with the ground in a gray stream of drizzling rain, and the damp wind chills to the bone. I was standing behind the counter, concentrating on wiping wet plates, when I felt his presence through the familiar noise of the kitchen. The moment Kevin Brooks walked into the diner for the first time is firmly imprinted in my memory. Even the air in the room seemed to have become different, more dense and saturated, when his figure flashed by the entrance. Tall, with dark hair, he carried himself at ease, but there was something attractive and mysterious in his gaze. A slight smile lit up his face, and looking at him, I suddenly felt a strange warmth, as if a forgotten corner of light had come to life in the depths of my heart. When I went out into the hall to fill the coffee pot, my eyes involuntarily stopped on him. My heart stopped for a moment, and then began to beat frantically. I didn't know that day that this man, who with casual confidence ordered a cup of black coffee from me, would change my life forever. We exchanged a few phrases, and I tried to sound professional, hiding the slight tremor in my voice, but even so, Kevin somehow sensed my excitement. "Can I have a coffee?" "Black, please." "And your phone number, if you're not too busy," he said, gazing intently into my eyes. I laughed out of surprise, which immediately made my cheeks flush. "I'm sorry, but we have company policy. I can't give customers my number," I replied, hiding my embarrassment behind a formal smile. He just smiled wider at that, with such benevolent determination that I felt an invisible spark run between us. "Well," he said, shrugging, "then I'll have to come back here every day until you change your mind." And he kept his word. Every day for 2 weeks Kevin came to the restaurant, ordering only coffee and having a short conversation with me. Over time, our conversation became warm, sincere, full of small revelations. He talked about his childhood, shared his thoughts about the future, but did not touch on the personal. I saw genuine curiosity in his eyes. He listened attentively, asked questions, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. With him, I felt like every day mattered. This warmth, which grew in me with each of his visits, gradually turned into something more than just sympathy. Finally, one evening I agreed to go on a date with him. I tried not to betray my feelings and only indifferently said, "One date. Just one thing. Don't get your hopes up, Mr. Brooks." But one date was the beginning of something incredible. Our evenings turned into little adventures filled with laughter, conversation, and dreams of the future. We wandered along the embankment, bought cheap takeaway food, looked at the lights of the night city, and dreamed. 6 months flew by like one day, and with every moment I was with Kevin, I felt that this man was my real happiness. But, as in all big stories, shadows have appeared in our love. I began to think about what awaits us next. Kevin was a man of a different background, with different abilities than mine. His parents, Henry and Catherine Brooks, owned a successful import-export business, and I knew that they probably weren't waiting for someone like me, a dishwasher with modest ambitions and limited prospects, for their son. Finally, the day came when I was supposed to meet his parents, and we gathered at a table in a luxurious restaurant, the luxury and splendor of which made me slightly dizzy. I hadn't even crossed the threshold when a sense of my own insignificance hit me. In this place, among tables covered with crisp white tablecloths, glasses with delicate ornate legs, gold candlesticks, and impeccably dressed waiters, I felt small and insignificant. The Brooks family was everything I wasn't: wealthy, confident, sometimes almost frighteningly cold-blooded. Henry Brooks, restrained and stern, sat opposite me with an impassive expression on his face. His heavy gaze was so penetrating that I wanted to lower my eyes. Next to him, Catherine, elegant, with a lock of hair pulled into a perfect bun, studied me. Her gaze was intense, almost cold, as if under her careful analysis I became a sample that was ruthlessly examined under a magnifying glass, noting the smallest flaws. She was the first to break the icy silence at the table. "Kevin tells us you're a dishwasher," she said, emphasizing each word with a restrained but obvious hint of disdain. I felt a shiver run through me from these words, but I restrained myself, straightened my back, and answered firmly, "Yes, I wash the dishes at the local diner. It helps me pay for my studies. I'm graduating from law school." Henry grinned, his expression faintly mocking. "Pretty ambitious for someone in your position, don't you think?" It seemed more like a statement than a question. I felt a chill run through my skin, but I forced myself to remain calm, swallowing the lump in my throat and firmly answering, "I am determined to get my way." And although I tried desperately to look strong and confident, it cost me an incredible effort. However, it only got worse. The dinner was filled with sharp remarks and caustic remarks that pierced me like the thinnest daggers, sharp, but at the same time disguised as politeness. I could feel a widening gap between Kevin and me under each of their words, as if his parents were trying to build an insurmountable wall between us. When we finally left the restaurant, I turned to Kevin, feeling my heart clench with resentment and powerlessness, and whispered, "They don't like me, and that's obvious." To which he, trying to comfort me, said, "It doesn't matter, Vanessa. I love you, and that's all that matters." But even he couldn't hide the tension in his voice, and it was like a mist in the air between us. We decided to have a small wedding, inviting only our closest friends. The Brooks family was not supposed to be present, and I was not only relieved, but also a little worried, because their absence from such an important event only increased their disapproval, making it even more obvious. But all my fears faded when our wedding day arrived. I was preparing for the ceremonial exit, feeling excitement and anticipation, when suddenly there was a sharp sound of doors opening, and everyone present froze. Henry and Catherine stood in the doorway, their faces contorted with indignation, and rage burned in their eyes. Henry was the first to break the silence, his voice filled with authority and reproach. "What are you doing?" His words hung in the air, deafening everyone present. Catherine took a step forward, her icy voice filled with disgust and contempt. "You can't marry her, Kevin," her gaze bored into me. "She's a gold digger, just look at her." I felt a hot wave of shame rush into my face, my cheeks burned with humiliation. "Please let us have our day," I stammered, gathering all my remaining strength and trying to keep my composure, but Catherine wouldn't let up. "Do you really think this girl will make you happy? It will only drag you to the bottom." I stood motionless, my heart pounding so hard that it seemed like it was about to jump out of my chest. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I tried to suppress them, trying to answer, but before I could say a word, Catherine made a sudden movement and grabbed me by the hair. I lost my balance and fell, feeling humiliation, pain, and bitterness overwhelm me to the brim. Kevin, white with anger, rushed forward, fire burning in his eyes. "Get away from her," he shouted, pulling his mother back with a force I hadn't seen in him before. His words cut through the air filled with shock and indignation of the guests. At that moment, I realized how serious the situation had become. It was impossible to imagine that after so many years, Vanessa Walker, would go this way, from a girl modestly rinsing dirty plates in a small diner to a woman who decided to enter into an unequal struggle with her family, who showered all her contempt on me. Kevin's words, "I love you the way you are," became the anchor to which I clung in moments when anger and resentment literally bubbled up in me. These words were important, but love alone was not enough to suppress the pain of humiliation. A new flame was being born inside me, hot and furious, a flame demanding justice. I needed to do more than just brush it off and move on. I wanted them to feel their wrongness as keenly as I felt it on our wedding day. The days after this humiliating event flowed slowly and thickly, like tar. Every morning I woke up with the feeling that I had to change something, that I had to fight back, defend myself. It was during this period that I came up with the idea to seek help from Mason Grant. I met him at law school, where he always amazed me with his intelligence and cold-blooded logic. Mason wasn't just a friend, he was the one who inspired me to move forward, reminding me that my purpose in life was greater than any petty feud. I knew that he would understand me, understand the fire that was now raging inside me. We met at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. I remember him looking at me, his gaze scrutinizing me, and after a long silence he said, "Vanessa, it's been too long, you look like you've been through a fight." And he was right, that's how I felt. I took a deep breath, considering my words, and finally made up my mind. "Mason, I need your help." Kevin's parents humiliated me in front of everyone, at my own wedding. I want the whole world to see their true face, their hypocrisy. His brow lifted, and his eyes flashed with interest. "What exactly do you mean, Vanessa?" And then, having regained confidence in my plan, I told him about my suspicions. Whispers about not entirely legitimate deals in their import-export business had reached me before, but it was only now, when my dignity was trampled into the mud, that I found the determination to reveal their secrets. I want to prove that their fortune is built on deception, on illegal schemes, that all their wealth is just a facade. Mason nodded, looking at me thoughtfully, his face serious. "Okay," he said after a pause, "let's start by looking at which recordings are available for public access. If we're lucky, we'll find the tracks, and we'll move on from them." From that moment on, our days turned into chaotic and stressful weeks. I was literally drowning in reports and financial documents, peering at rows of numbers and tables, trying to catch any signs of illegal transactions, while Mason used his connections and skills to establish contacts in the industry and extract valuable information. It was a job that required the utmost concentration, but each new discovery only fueled my resolve. We started to find traces, missing documents, strange anomalies in reports, rumors of unregistered exports. All this formed a picture, each element of which added credibility to my idea. One afternoon, when Mason and I were looking through the next recordings, his face suddenly lit up, and without taking his eyes off the screen, he said, "Vanessa, take a look at this." The news was visible on his laptop screen. It turns out that the Brooks family was already under investigation on suspicion of tax fraud. My heart was racing with excitement. If we can gather additional evidence, we can deal them a truly devastating blow, permanently destroying their impeccable reputation. "We need to dig even deeper," I said, feeling confidence and inspiration fill me with renewed vigor. Now I had to do everything possible to restore my dignity and show the Brooks that I was not someone they could humiliate with impunity. I was no longer that timid girl whose life was limited to a modest job. I was becoming someone else, someone who took the path of justice, driven by the power of my purpose and the desire for retribution. Kevin supported me, but I could see that it was getting harder for him. One evening he asked cautiously, "Vanessa, are you sure you want to go all the way? It could backfire on you." But in response, I just said firmly, "I cannot let them escape responsibility for what they have done." He nodded, his face clouded with worry. Just be careful. I don't want to lose you in this battle. When Samantha Reed nodded silently, my words finally found support and became more than just a thirst for revenge. It was a chance to restore justice, perhaps not only for me, but for everyone who has ever suffered from the pride and power of the Brooks family. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Until that moment, I was just a woman with determination, ready to fight for my dignity, but now, with a journalist recognized as a master of his craft, the story gained real power. We were on the verge of revealing the truth, which could change not only my future, but also the lives of many others. Samantha looked at us with a seriousness that I immediately appreciated, and after a few minutes of silent reflection, she said, "We have a difficult job ahead of us, Vanessa. We are not just opposing the same family. We are in conflict with the system that supports their position." These words echoed in my mind as a reminder that not only the truth about my humiliation was at stake, but also the exposure of the corruption that was poisoning the entire city. In the following weeks, our small team turned into a real investigative agency. Mason, as always, was at his best, wading through tons of documents, investigating shady deals that could lead us to evidence that could destroy the Brooks. There was the same fire in his eyes as in mine, but I also saw how he began to understand the danger we were putting ourselves in. Every time we met with Samantha, I felt that we were moving closer to the goal. She collected interviews, researched corporate connections, and talked to people many were even afraid to remember. Gradually, as if in a complex puzzle, the full picture began to emerge in front of us. Corrupt transactions, illegal export transactions, tax evasion, and dozens of former employees who left under pressure or, worse, disappeared without a trace. Kevin watched my meetings with the team with growing anxiety, but did not interfere. Sometimes a shadow of fear crossed his face when he saw how deeply I was plunging into this case. One evening, after another meeting at Mason's apartment, he stopped me, his face clouded with worry. "Vanessa, you're not the same person you used to be. This struggle has changed you. I see how it consumes you every day." His words sounded like a warning, but I understood that it was impossible to retreat. "I have to do this, Kevin," I replied, feeling anger and determination overwhelm me. "I can no longer be who they see me as, who they want to see me as. I have to stand up for myself and for those they destroyed." The day came when Samantha and I decided to make some of the information public. She prepared an introductory report, which was published in a small but respected newspaper. This was the beginning of a campaign against the Brooks family, and although the article looked cautious, its content left little doubt that something was wrong in their business. The article caused a storm, and the next day newspapers and television were abuzz with speculation and discussion. I knew that this was just a warm-up for the real storm that was about to hit. Less than a few days later, I felt the consequences of our actions. One night, on my way home, I noticed a black car following me, slowing down at my house. I was trembling, but I knew I shouldn't show fear. The next day, I received a letter in my mail, which, without further ado, contained a warning. "If you value your life, stop messing with other people's business," the note read, and its cold words seemed to burn me. I knew the Brooks would start pushing, but I didn't expect it to happen so soon. When I showed the note to Mason, he frowned, his face became even more serious. "Vanessa, do you understand what this means?" "They're not joking," he said softly, the tension in his voice. But I had already made up my mind. There was no turning back. The police were carefully examining the situation, and their intense gazes gave the moment an ominous connotation. I realized that every detail mattered now. Every word I said could be used against me or, conversely, become a small piece of the puzzle that might be able to protect me. Deep down, I knew that this was a new level of the game, and it was much more dangerous than all the previous ones. I exchanged a glance with Kevin. His eyes were full of anxiety, but there was also a determination in his gaze to stand with me to the end. His presence was my support, an anchor that kept me from the turbulent waters of panic. The officers seemed to be waiting for me to decide to provide evidence that could save us from new charges. I nodded, trying to control my breathing, and said, "All the materials are in a separate folder. It is password protected and kept by my friend Mason. You can contact him and explore everything, every page, every entry, every digit." We didn't fake anything. We have neither the power or the wealth to compete with them in manipulation and intimidation. The policemen looked at each other, and one of them seemed to mark my statement with some respect. While we were waiting for them to check Mason's contacts, I felt the anger inside me flare up more and more. They are trying to discredit me by putting labels on me again, building dirty stories that I have already had to deal with. My past, which I wasn't proud of, was being brought back to the surface, as if that could explain my current actions. But this time I had good reasons not to give up. "Miss Walker," the officer spoke again, interrupting my thoughts, "we have contacted your friend. He confirmed your statement and agreed to provide materials for further study. However, we warn you, while the investigation is underway, your activities and your movements will be closely monitored. I hope you understand how serious the situation is." His words seemed icy, each one like a razor cutting through my nerves. But I knew I was ready for this. I was ready for their attacks, for their methods of pressure, for the fact that I would be intimidated, as if I were a simple pawn in their game. After the officers left the apartment, the gravity of the moment weighed on Kevin and me for a long time. We were both silent, each immersed in his own thoughts, realizing that the quiet days were far behind us. Now every step could lead to unpredictable consequences. I felt a determination growing in me, as if fear were a fire fueling my desire to confront them. Kevin hugged me, his arms like a protective wall against everything that was trying to break me. "Vanessa, I know this all seems insurmountable. But know that I'm with you. We'll get through this together." His voice, warm and encouraging, gave me strength. I looked into his eyes, feeling at that moment how important his presence was next to me. The next morning, when I woke up, I felt a firm confidence in what needed to be done. Samantha, of course, was aware that the case could take such a turn, and prepared us in advance for any possible attacks from the Brooks side. I gathered my thoughts and decided to contact her, discussing our further action plan. We could not afford the slightest mistake, we could not back down, allowing them to manipulate the truth, turning it into a lie. On the way to the meeting, I felt like the city, as if talking, was witnessing my battle. The people around me seemed indifferent, but it seemed to me that their eyes were boring into me, studying me, as if wanting to find out what this girl who challenged the most powerful family in the area was capable of. When the officers left, leaving Kevin and me in silence, broken only by the hum of anxious thoughts, I felt a heavy burden of responsibility fall on my shoulders. We both knew that we had no way back. This time I was in the thick of the fight, and every step could be decisive. I looked at Kevin, whose eyes were shining with the same fear that I felt deep down inside. "We need to collect everything we have," I said softly, and he just nodded, agreeing without words, realizing that this was our only defense. We spent several days poring over reports and testimony, almost forgetting about sleep and rest. I checked every detail, every document, and every piece of information we found became like a weapon for me to use. However, each new anonymous threat that appeared on my phone screen, like a venomous snake, continued to press on my nerves, plunging its venom of fear, from which I could no longer hide. Nevertheless, I stubbornly repeated to myself, "I won't let fear get me down." This phrase has become my mantra, a shield against any interference from the Brooks family. And finally the day came when the police returned. Holding my breath, I handed them the documents, as if I trusted them with a part of my life. We gave them the financial statements, the testimony of former employees, the data we collected, as if we were passing on to them a story on which our future depended. The officers promised to investigate everything thoroughly, and I felt both fear and determination gripping me in an iron vise at the same time. After they left, I picked up the phone and dialed Mason. His voice, confident and calm, was like an anchor in this stormy ocean. "Mason, I feel like they're preparing a retaliatory strike. Their next move will be swift and possibly destructive," I whispered, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. His words, full of support and faith, were a reminder to me that I was not alone, that there were people ready to fight alongside me. The following weeks passed in agonizing anticipation, as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for a push. I could feel the tension building, like the bulk of an impending storm that was going to hit at any moment. And so, one morning, the phone rang, and Samantha was on the line. Her voice sounded joyful and confident. "Vanessa, the news about the police investigation has leaked to the press. Now the Brooks family can't hide." My hands trembled, and my heart began to beat with a vengeance. We took a step that could not be taken back. Soon, headlines began to appear on TV and in the news. "The Brooks family scandal. The empire is under threat of exposure." This story began to take on life, like a flame spreading through dry grass. I saw how people began to support me, and words of support from those who themselves fought against injustice began to appear on social networks. I was no longer just a lone figure in this battle. I became a symbol of resilience for those who once faced the same thing as me. Months passed, and Henry and Catherine Brooks were arrested. It seemed that our entire confrontation had brought us here, to this moment of justice. When the news of their fall spread around the world, I felt such strength in myself, as if it was not just a victory over the enemy, but the triumph of justice over all the injustices that I had suffered. Kevin was there, his words quiet but determined. "You did it, Vanessa. You have proved that truth and courage can withstand any darkness." I looked at him and realized that all this struggle was not only for the restoration of dignity, but also for our love, our faith in justice. With these thoughts, I returned to my dream. I entered the faculty of law, and every line of textbooks, every exam I passed brought me closer to my goal. Years later, I stood on the podium during the graduation ceremony, and my words about perseverance and justice, were addressed to those who listened to me, to those who once, perhaps, needed support and inspiration. My journey was just beginning, but I was ready, knowing that this path no longer scares me. I believe that the true value of a person is determined not by origin or wealth, but by his loyalty to the truth, his willingness to resist injustice, and his courage to love and support even in the darkest moments. And that's why my story continues like a burning star in the sky, the light of which no one will ever be able to extinguish.